Okay, we are live. Hey, everybody. You've been watching with probably horror, as I have, about the terrible things that are happening in Syria right now. Well, let me tell you something. It's not exactly what you think. And so we're going to break that down today. And I'm going to point out to you just some history here that may give you a little better understanding of what's happening in Syria. It's still horrific, but believe me, it's not exactly what you think. So we're gonna talk about that today. I'm Chuck Holton. I'm here in my studio in Panama. I'm coming to you from the my home, which is rare. Don't get to come here very often, but uh, I just got back from Israel. Spent a lot of time up in the north. You could actually hear some of the craziness going on over the border in Lebanon. And the IDF, just as an aside, is still striking targets inside Lebanon and inside Syria because there's still threats to them. And Benjamin Netanyahu put out just a few minutes ago that the IDF will strike any organization, any place that is a threat to Israel, and they're not going to wait until those people attack them before they do it. If they get intel that says that some organization, some terror group is about to commit acts of violence against Israel, they are going to strike first and strike hard. And that's what they've done. Over the last 24 hours, they dropped a bomb on a house in Damascus and flattened it with apparently a meeting going on inside of Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists that were planning they were in the act of planning uh, shenanigans against Israel. So somebody's saying that the audio is a little low. I always like to check that at the beginning. I'll turn it up a little bit. And okay, there we go. How's that? Is that better? All right. Hopefully that's a little louder audio for you. Okay, now the first thing I want to do is give you a little bit of uh, background on the conflict in Syria, because here's what got me started on this. I was looking at X today, and you're starting to see a lot of photographs come out of uh, Alawite children, these children looking very forlorn. Please help Syria. Uh, you know, Making the Alawites out to be this innocent victims in this conflict. And in reality, nothing could be further from the truth. Now, before I even go down that road, let me make very, 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 very clear. What's happening in Syria is an atrocity. What's happening in Syria is terrible. It should not be happening. And I denounce it in every possible way. It is morally reprehensible for anybody to be wantonly massacring people in Syria or anywhere else. We're also seeing lots of massacres like that going on in many other places around the globe. But today we're just going to stick with Syria. So I categorically denounce the violence. Okay. And I'm not going to make a case today that it's in any way justified. However, if you start to look back and understand a little more about the history of Syria, you might understand a little more why this is coming about this way. Okay, so let's back up. First of all, I'm going to tell you the end at the beginning so you can kind of understand where I'm going with all this. That Christians in Syria get persecuted by everybody. So do other minorities like the Yazidis and Kurds to some extent, but Christians especially. And it's not like there are only a few. There once, at one time in our lifetime, about 20 years ago, Christians made up about 10% of the population of Syria. There was millions of Christians in Syria. There are Syriac Christians, there are Maronite Christians, there are Armenian Christians, there are Catholics, there are Greek Christians. And I've been to their churches. Many of them were burned out when the Islamic State took over. But Christianity, the history of Christianity in Syria goes all the way back to the Old Testament, or the New Testament, I guess, better put. As you recall, the Apostle Paul was on his way to Damascus when he had his conversion experience and saw the bright light. So the sad reality is that it is really the Christians who are the biggest victims of not just this particular event that we've seen over the last week or two, but over the last many decades. If you just look at, again, 20 years ago, if Christians were 10% of the population, today they're about 2% of the population. That means millions of Christians have either left or been killed or been driven out in the last 2 decades. And that corresponds, well, roughly with Bashar al-Assad's reign. If you go back to the reign of his father, Hafez al-Assad, he started in 1973, I think, and served until 2000 as the president. And he was a brutal dictator in his own right. Bashar al-Assad brought hopes, because he was a dentist or an optometrist or something, that that things would get a little calmer, and it actually ended up, he doubled down on his father's actions and got a whole lot worse. So let's back up and talk a little bit about the history of Syria here, so you can kind of understand what's happening today. The Alawites are a sect of Shia Islam. And a sect, I should say, they're kind of a cult, because many Shia across the globe don't really consider Alawites to be true Muslims, but suffice it to say they come from Shia Islam. And let me just ask you if you can guess where this is going. Who else? What other group that's nearby in this region is also belonging to the Shiite version of Islam? Put that in the chat. Put your guess in the chat, and we'll come back to it and talk about it in a little bit. Now, the reason the Alawites came to power, they are a decided minority. Only about 10% of Syria is Alawite, and they all live pretty much in the eastern coastline, okay, in that area, and that we've seen so much violence in over the last few days. Now, Alawites came to power mostly because they were favored by the French colonial rule, which went from 1920 to, I don't know, 1946, I think, is when they left. So the question again, the Light Life, is what other group that's in this region, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Turkey, all those, what other group in that region is Shiite? Okay, how do they, because the Alawites, being part of Shia Islam, are more friendly to Shiites than they are to Sunnis. So your guess is, what group am I referring to that is Shiite in nature? Okay, so anyway, under French colonial rule, which ended in 1946, the Alawites and the Druze were actually favored. And that laid the groundwork for their dominance in government, because they had already occupied a lot of government positions under the French. And so then they were overrepresented, not just in government, but also in the military, right? So when the Assad family came to power, 1970, there was a brutal coup, and Hafez al-Assad took power and immediately put Alawites into all the most important positions around the country of Syria. And they brutally repressed everybody else. So their most famous atrocity was, it happened in 1982 when Hafez al-Assad committed what they call the Hama Massacre, where his forces killed, they say, up to 40,000 people. And those people were all Sunni. Okay, so what organization or group in Syria, or groups in Syria, for you to put in the chat, uh, are the Sunni part of the religion? Let's see how good your understanding is of all these different groups. As you know, it's not just all one homogenous group of Muslims in Syria. There are so many different groups there. But what is your guess for a couple? There are several major groups in Syria who are Sunni in nature. And Mama Riss is saying Druze for everything. um, so, at any rate, there was a Sunni Muslim Brotherhood uprising in 1982, and Hafez al-Assad just crushed it and just killed men, women, and children. Okay, just brutally repressed the Sunni population. Now, after his father died, Bashar al-Assad, instead of reforming, actually made it worse. And when the Syrian civil war started 11 years later, he did the same thing he'd seen his father do, which is just go out and start machine gunning people. And so the Bashar al-Assad regime quickly escalated against all forms of opposition. So whether that was Kurds, Yazidis, Druze, anybody, all forms of opposition were murdered, and the Alawites, again, taking all the most important positions across the country in the military and in the government. So now what we saw Bashar al-Assad do put what his father did in some ways to shame. And that is when he decided to go after his enemies. This was during the Obama administration in 2013. He had already, up until 2013, between 2011 and 2013, they'd been deliberately bombing hospitals, schools, mosques, residential areas, everything they could to terrorize the people, specifically acts of terror against the Sunni population, which was the majority. But in 2013, it was his, magnum opus of brutality, and it was the massacre in Ghouta. Do you all remember when Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons against his own people? Sarin gas attacks in Ghouta, which is a suburb of Damascus. There were thousands of innocent people that were gassed to death in Ghouta in 2013. Now, Barack Obama at that time, you remember his famous red line. He drew a red line. Look, if when this happened, the first news started coming out, and Assad's regime, I think, was surprised that they had managed to kill so many people. I don't think they thought they were going to kill quite that many people. And when it turned out and all the images started coming out of just thousands of children, women, babies, all massacred, and foaming at the mouth, their eyeballs coming. I mean, the things that sarin gas does to you are horrific. The first thing that the Assad regime did was say, no, it wasn't us. This was some opposition group. This a black swan. They're trying to, trying to make it look like it was us, but it wasn't us. But investigators went over there and they found the munitions that were used, the what was left of the canisters that had been fired into Ghouta. And it turned out that the only group that had that kind of munition, there's 144 millimeter rockets, were the Syrian army under Bashar al-Assad. And then video came out of the Syrian army actually firing those rockets. And that you can still find that on YouTube today. So there was no question that it was Assad's regime that did that. But when the first word started to come out that there was a big gas attack and thousands of people are dead, somebody asked Barack Obama, like, what are you going to do about the Syrian government if they're gassing their own people? And he said, well, that would definitely be a red line. Well, then when the proof came out that it was Bashar al-Assad that had gassed his own people, well, the Obama administration did exactly nothing. Hey, J-Lo and Ray-Lo, how's it going? Good to see you. We were just talking about you today. Thank you for being here. Hope you're doing well. So the idea, just put it this way. First of all, I got to back up a little bit more here because there's even more history to this. You recall one of the reasons that we went into Iraq the first time was because Colin Powell came and sat down and gave a briefing and said there are chemical weapons in Iraq and those weapons could be used by Saddam Hussein. And so that was one of the reasons that we decided to invade. Well, as it turns out, and everybody, the prevailing narrative now is that that was a farce, that it was conjured up information in order to draw America into war in Iraq. But as it turns out, there actually were chemical weapons in Iraq, and those chemical weapons were shipped to Syria when the United States, it looked like they were about to invade. And those, perhaps some of those same weapons, those same, rockets, because Iraq under Saddam Hussein and Bashar al-Assad Syria were allies, and they both got their weapons from the same place, the Soviet Union. So they both got the same weapons, and they both had those same 144 millimeter rockets that held sarin gas. But the ones in Iraq mysteriously vanished and they went up to Syria. Now, if Barack Obama had done something about that, then likely Syria would look a whole lot different today, and there would be hundreds of thousands of people still alive that are now not alive. And this is just proof that sometimes doing nothing can be as bad or worse than doing the wrong something. And Barack Obama just chose to sit that one out. Looking back, perhaps that wasn't the best idea. Nevertheless, after 2013, Assad began rounding up and imprisoning anybody that might possibly not like him and his people. Thank you, Rooster. Good to see you. And we're not talking about, hundreds of people. We're not even talking about a few thousand people. We're talking about 50,000 plus who were rounded up, detained in prisons, tortured, inhumane conditions, mass executions, where they would literally line up hundreds of people and machine gun them like something out of World War II, out of Nazi Germany. And so, I'm getting to that. John, whatever, he says, what should we do? Well, I'll get to that. So stay tuned, okay? Just bear with me. Assad's prisons were infamous for torture, mass rape, all sorts of stuff. Terrible, terrible things. His forces, ever since I've been covering these wars, which again, I've been doing this 22 years, Assad's forces have been randomly and intentionally bombing civilian areas in primarily Alawite places. I'm sorry, not Alawite, primarily Sunni towns like Idlib and Homs and other places like that. Idlib became synonymous for the brutality of Bashar al-Assad because he bombed almost every residential neighborhood in Idlib. Now, I need to point out that Bashar al-Assad didn't do it without help. He did it with a lot of assistance from one country. And I'm going to let you guess what, I bet you can guess what country I'm talking about. So put it in the chat. What I'm trying to engage you, get you thinking with me here. What country supported Bashar al-Assad, especially in terms of militarily committing acts of brutality and violence against the people of Syria? Anybody know? I'm waiting. I'm watching the chat here. I want to see. No, it was not Iran. Mama Rissa nailed it. It was Russia. That's right. I figured you guys would get it. Yeah, it was Russia. Russia has been assisting the Alawite minority, the leadership, for many years. They've been aligned with the Alawites. And with that in mind, Russia bears some responsibility because I've been there and watched Russian airplanes bombing civilian areas in Syria. I've seen that on my own trips to Syria. I'll be heading there again in mid-April. Now, Russia's presence there is not near as robust as it once was, but they still have a presence. And I don't know if they're still bombing things, but anyway, they brutally bombed places like Aleppo, Homs, Idlib, and just reduced those whole places to rubble. It was really, really bad. So if you start with that history, you can probably have a better understanding of why now that the Sunnis have control under HTS, why they are brutalizing the Alawites. Because the Alawites have had the power glove for the last 50 years, and now they're out of power. And so it's time for some payback. Now, again, just to be clear, what's happening in Syria right now is an atrocity. It's terribly wrong. HTS, the Sunnis, should not be murdering whole families or, mass executing people in the Alawite communities or the Christian communities or the Druze communities or anything in Syria. All of that is completely wrong. But now we start to understand where this hatred comes from a little bit. And I guess what I'm pointing out here is that the mainstream media and social media seems to always focus on the present, on exactly what's happening right now. And that's okay. I mean, it's okay to denounce that violence that's happening now. We all should. But it helps to understand a little bit more of the history of the region to understand why it's happening. Now, here's the kicker. That group that I told you that was Shiite, that was allied with the Alawite regime under Bashar al-Assad, was Hezbollah. And Hezbollah and Assad have worked together very closely. As a matter of fact, Hezbollah came to Assad's rescue in like 2013 when he was about to get overthrown right after, a couple years after the beginning of the conflict in the civil war. Bashar al-Assad was losing. I mean, he was about to lose power, and Hezbollah came to his rescue. So one of the things that we're seeing right now is that the Alawites are allying with what's left of Hezbollah and are working together with Hezbollah cross-border into Lebanon. Now, HTS is its own problem because the Sunni organization. So let's break down the teams here. You have the Alawites and Hezbollah, which are Shiite. Who else is Shiite? Iran. Okay, Iran is Shiite. And they're all supported by Iran. Iran supported Bashar al-Assad and supported Hezbollah. Okay, Iran wanted to control what it called like a Iranian crescent from Tehran all the way to Beirut. That never came to fruition, largely because the Israelis kept a very close eye on what was happening inside Syria and would bomb anything as soon as they started getting getting that land bridge together. If they started, putting together storage facilities or bunkers, or they saw military equipment coming across or whatever, the Israelis would go in there and bomb it. So, I mean, the Israelis have been bombing things in Syria off and on for 20 years. And they never really ask permission. They just do it. So we can thank Israel for keeping the Iranians from controlling all of that. And without Israel's intervention, Bashar al-Assad would probably still be in power. So now the question is that a good thing? Because Bashar al-Assad was a monster, but he was a stable monster. I mean, he was a monster that kept a stable government. HTS is trying to form a stable government, but is not doing well at that, obviously. This leader, I keep wanting to call him the new president of Syria. He's not the president. He's just a guy that killed enough people to take power. He's not elected in any way, shape, or form. Thank you, Jemmy. At all. But he's trying very hard to put on this new face of like, oh, we're the reasonable Muslims here now. But you put a suit on a jihadi, he's still a jihadi. And no matter what he says, just look at what he and his people have done and are doing across Syria now. Like I said, it's the Christians who really suffer here. So Hafez al-Assad claimed that he was going to represent all the people and that he would partner with the different tribal groups in Syria. But in reality, he just repressed Christians all the more. Christian political figures, activists. This guy here, let's go look at this place. How do I switch that over? Here we go. Go look at this guy. His name is Michael Kilo. He was a Syrian activist who was jailed by Hafez al-Assad in the 1980s and 90s. He then fled to, I think, France or someplace, came back. He was a Christian activist. And every time he came back to Syria, they'd put him in jail again, no matter who was in charge. Poor guy. This guy was, did not have a good life. He died of the sickness in 2021. So this picture that I'm showing you now is from a town called Malula. And Malula was targeted by, let's see, look at my notes here. Malula was targeted. It was a Christian, that's 2013. It's a Christian town that suffered under Bashar al-Assad. And I've just zoomed in on the cross there because this is a town inside Syria. It's just north of Damascus. Actually, if we close this picture, we can see Damascus is here and Malula is that red dot right there. So it's a majority Christian community inside Syria that was all but wiped out by Bashar al-Assad. Ancient town. Aramaic is still spoken there. Was heavily bombed by both the regime and the Russians and the opposition forces. Everybody was bombing Malula. And again, this is just proves my point that it's really the Christians who are suffering most in this area, even though there's been a lot of hyperbole, a lot of misinformation that's been put out about the current troubles that they're having over the last week or two. There's been a lot of old videos that are resurfacing from 2017 and other times in Syria that show people being crucified and summarily executed and different things like that. Those are not current videos from what's happening right now, although it wouldn't surprise me if things exactly like that are happening and just not being filmed. There are plenty of things that are happening and are being filmed that show how bad it is, that, believe me, you don't want to go see if you can avoid it. The Bashar al-Assad regime targeted lots of Christian humanitarian aid groups inside Syria, any NGOs that tried to help anybody, whether they were, helping Alawites or not. Any Christian activist, anybody who criticized Assad, of course, was going to get disappeared or at least tortured. There's a very good book I read about Syria, about the Syrian civil war, and it's called Brothers of the Gun, I believe. I read that a couple years ago on my last trip to Syria. What was amazing about that story is it tells the story of these brothers who lived in Raqqa when the Islamic State came in. And they were, of course, the Islamic State was brutally repressing everybody. These brothers wanted to fight for the resistance, but one of them decided that he would become like undercover. So he would go around and take pictures of Islamic State locations, headquarters, whatever. And then he would send those out and get them out to the world. And he decided that he would fight back by being a journalist and getting photographs out of the atrocities that were taking place under ISIS and, send them out to the world. His uncle had an internet cafe / coffee house on the banks of the Euphrates River. And this brother would work there in the coffee house, and there was a building nearby that had been taken over by the Islamic State where they would put their wounded fighters to recover. So these wounded guys would come down and come to this coffee shop to use the internet. And so he would just be there and he would listen to what they were saying and he would find out what their plans were, and then he would pass that along secretly to the outside world. And it was very dangerous, obviously, for him to do this. What was really cool is that as I was reading this book and he was describing the coffee house and what it looked like and where it was located and the things that happened there, I actually went to Raqqa with the Free Burma Rangers. We went there to inaugurate a new church that had been rebuilt by FBR. It was an Armenian Christian church in downtown Raqqa that had been destroyed by ISIS. And then FBR came in and over the course of a year paid to have it restored. And we came back to rededicate that church on that trip. It was a great trip. And you can find my podcast about that if you just search for it. Actually, we'll put it up over at chuckholton.com so that you can go find it easily. How about that? So Rubina, if you wouldn't mind reminding me to put that video of the Armenian Christian church in Raqqa up on chuckholton.com. While I'm at it, folks, let me just encourage you to go to chuckholton.com and subscribe over there. We're putting up a ton of extra information. All of the stuff that I'm putting out in these talks, my lives that I do, we're putting up a condensed version with just the most important points in writing so that you can go copy and paste or send that out to your friends. If you wanted to, remember, which group was he talking about? Or, what some of the details that I mentioned, you can go and get those at chuckholton.com. You can also get access to my most recent books. You can get access to some of my documentaries taking place over there. We're going to release a new documentary here shortly. And so you can have access to all of that at chuckholton.com, and you can support us over there if you like. That's completely up to you, but we certainly appreciate all the people who subscribe over there. You can subscribe for free. And don't freak out if it takes you to Locals or Rumble, because Locals and Rumble are one and the same company, and that's where the page directs to. So if you go to chuckholton.com, you're going to end up on Locals under my page. That's by design. It's supposed to happen that way. And so don't worry that you're getting scammed or something, okay? Now, so when I went to Raqqa, at one point we crossed across the bridge, across the Euphrates River, and I looked over, and there was the coffee shop that this guy had mentioned in the book that I had just been reading about, all the things that took place at this coffee shop. It was closed when we went by this time, but it was still there. And it was just so cool to see it. And I had been picturing it the way he described it. It had little like cupolas or minarets sort of on the sides, and the way the windows and overlooked the river and everything. And it was exactly as he had described it, as I had pictured it in my mind. It was really cool to see. That's, again, the book is called Brothers of the Gun. And maybe somebody can post a link to that in the chat if you'd like to go get that book. It's a very good book if you want to understand more about the history of the Alawites and the Sunnis and why they don't like each other and why they don't get along. Well, basically what it comes down to, folks, is that some fish don't swim together in the same pond. They just can't exist together. And the next point I wanted to make was, again, just how close the Alawites and Hezbollah are working together. So Hafez al-Assad supported Hezbollah from its creation in the 1980s. He deepened his ties with Hezbollah after taking power in 2000. Bashar al-Assad did, and made Syria a vital part of that Iranian crescent, right? We could ask Lara Logan if they're mostly peaceful. Yeah, she was raped in Egypt. I remember that. I know Lara, and I know her. I mean, I'm acquainted with her. I'm not friends with her, but I'm acquainted with her. She's had a rough time since then, for sure. So going back to the map. Oh, somebody's asking, what's that blank area right there? Let's zoom in on it. It is looks like just an open area. Let's see if there's any pictures. There's no pictures. Yeah, I think it's just an open desert area outside of town. Most of Syria that I've been to is over here in the eastern part of the country. So you have the Euphrates River right here. This is the Euphrates River Valley. And this comes up. Everything to the east of this, all of this part in here, is controlled by the Kurds currently. The question is, what's going to happen? Now, I want to bring all this back to Turkey. Under Bashar al-Assad, he was, like I said, he was a monster, but he was a monster that brought stability. Bashar al-Assad is an evil man. No question about that. But what we are seeing right now is the outgrowth of decades of animosity and hatred that was fomented by Bashar al-Assad and his father throughout that country. Essentially, everybody hates everybody because it was such a brutal, barbaric place to live. And everybody blames everybody else. The one who is pulling the strings right now, everything that you see happening, is Turkey. So Turkey is Sunni. They're very happy to see Bashar al-Assad gone. Guess who else is Sunni? The Islamic State. So when you talk about Sunni extremists, the Islamic State, the Free Syrian Army, the Syrian National Army, and the Turkish Army are all essentially one and the same. The SNA, the FSA, and HTS are all just sort of proxies for the Turkish military. And Turkey is giddy over what's happening right now. And what they're about to do, what you may very well be about to see, is very serious violence against the Kurds. Turkey is still, I mean, you're hearing about the massacres that are taking place in the eastern coastline, in the Alawite areas of Syria. But nobody's talking about the fact that Turkey is massacring people weekly from Kobani, Manbij. I've been to those places. Ain Issa, Tel Tamer, all along the northern border of Turkey, of Syria, between Syria and Turkey. The Turkish are bombing people left and right. There was a convoy of ambulances the other day that was bombed by Turkey, clearly marked, and they just bombed the whole. There was like 13 ambulances, and they bombed all of them. Turkey, for some reason, is getting a pass right now. But they are not only responsible for any massacres that HTS is doing, because believe me, HTS, those people would not be killing anybody if Turkey told them not to. But Turkey is giving them free hand to cleanse the country of anybody who's not friendly to Turkey. And their own military, the Turkish military, is attacking the Kurds in the north. Now, the Kurds have like 39 different political parties, okay? They're a very fragmented culture. And that's partially because they don't have a country and they live across like 4 or 5 different countries. They live in Iran and Iraq and Syria and southern Turkey. 30-something million people. It's the largest people group on planet Earth that doesn't have a country. It's as big as Venezuela as far as their population is concerned, or Ukraine right now. And yet they don't have a land. So the Kurds are by and large Sunni, but they're very moderate. They're very modern. Their women don't cover their heads. You can find alcohol. I mean, it's a very moderate, progressive Muslim culture. And they are kind, they're generous, and they're friendly to Americans. As a matter of fact, if you go back during the war in Iraq, guess how many American troops the United States lost in Kurdish-held areas of Iraq? 0. The U.S. never lost a troop in Kurdish-held territory in what's now called Kurdistan in northern Iraq. That's saying something. You don't see tons of suicide bombers, car bombs, all the terrible terrorism stuff that happens across the Middle East. That stuff doesn't happen in Kurdistan. You could take your children on vacation to Erbil if you wanted to. There's not a lot to see, but it's safe, and you can get some good food there. That's about all, I guess. It's pretty dry. But for the most part, they don't have the real problems with terrorism and crime and stuff that they do in other parts of the Middle East. So they're a very progressive group. But there was one group of Kurds who was on the fringe, and it was called the PKK. And it was the Kurdish Workers' Party. PKK their own acronym for the Kurdish Workers' Party. It was a communist party. They were straight up communist, Marxist communist, and they were advocating for the whole area, the whole region, to become communist. They wanted whatever Kurdistan looked like to be communist Kurdistan. Well, the rest of the Kurds were not on board with that, and so they didn't get along with the PKK very well. As a matter of fact, there was a lot of fighting at times between the PKK and other elements of the Kurds. However, when the Islamic State came in and started taking over ground in Syria and Iraq, the Kurds all, banded together to fight the Islamic State. And so it was not uncommon to see PKK and YPG, which is another military arm of the Kurds, working together to fight against ISIS. Well, that didn't make the PKK any nicer. They weren't nice people. I got arrested by the PKK one time for taking pictures, and they weren't mean to me, but they weren't kind either. And fortunately, that got worked out quickly, and I didn't. I was just taking pictures of the sunset. I didn't think there was anything wrong with that. But apparently, in the corner of my picture was a piece of a wall that belonged to an ancient castle, which I thought was kind of cool, until I found out that inside that castle, the PKK had set up shop and made that their headquarters. And so they thought I was taking pictures of their headquarters. They came out with AK-47s on me and dragged me into the, not dragged physically, but took me into their base. They didn't have anybody who spoke English, so it was kind of dicey there for a minute. They're yelling, I'm yelling. Nobody understands each other. That's never good when you have guns involved. And eventually, we had an entire conversation with just the word friend. There was two girls that came who knew the word friend, and they were like, friend? And I was like, friend, friend, friend. And I was like, friend, 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 friend. Like I wanted to show them where my friends were because we had somebody who could speak with them and translate. So I finally got them to accompany me over to where the Free Burma Rangers base was. We got our translator out there. We brought them all t-shirts. They all got Free Burma Rangers t-shirts, and we smoothed it all over, and everybody was happy. You could bring world peace if you had enough t-shirts. I firmly believe that. Nevertheless, the PKK and the rest of the Kurds worked together to fight against the Islamic State, but that doesn't mean that they're friends. And now that the Kurds see that their hard-fought gains in Syria, that whole eastern third of Syria they call Rojava, is under threat, and they may lose it because they're hoping to establish a state there. They want that to be Kurdistan, okay? And if they can't do that, they're going to be back to square one. So the PKK, amazingly, agreed to disband, lay down their arms, and will be no more. Just leave us alone over here. And that's great, but the Turks are like, yeah, but we still think everybody else is also PKK, is just as bad. One Kurd, the only good Kurd is a dead Kurd. That's as far as the Turks are concerned. And so they are still continuing to bomb Kurds in Rojava. And that's where I'm going when I go in there. Now, Muslim Abdi, the general of the YPG, the Syrian Democratic Forces, or the Kurds, is making overtures to try to join with HTS. It's another Sunni organization, quite a bit more extremist. And they feel like, I believe, that's their only chess move at this point in order to survive as, Rojava. I don't know if that will go very well for them, because you're certainly not going to moderate the extremists of HTS. However, because the United States is pulling out of Syria, at least that was announced, the Kurds at this point feel like they don't have many other options. And like I mentioned I did a live over at Locals the other day, and I mentioned this over there, that the Kurds currently are holding more than 10,000 former ISIS families and fighters in open air camps inside Rojava, the eastern part of Syria. The only way they can keep a lid on those places is with assistance from the United States. If they stop getting that assistance from the United States and they ally themselves with HTS, those Islamic State families and fighters, who are only more extremist now than they ever were, are going to get set free into the general population of Syria. And so what we might be seeing right now is the puzzle pieces coming together for a much more extremist Syria than what we had up until December of last year. Syria up until December of last year was terrible. Bashar al-Assad was a monster. But what we're about to see could very well be worse. Now, somebody asked what we can do about this. Oh yeah, it's terrible to hear about, but what can we do about it? Well, the most you can always do is pray. If you pray, just pray that evil men would be thwarted in Syria, and I think you can leave it at that. Let God worry about the details. If you don't have to understand Sunni, Shia, Kurds, Alawites, Druze, HTS, all these different groups, SDF and SNA and FSA, and you don't have to worry about all that. You just pray that God would thwart the plans of evil men in Syria, and God will honor that prayer, I think. You need to pray for wisdom for Israel, for how they should approach this, because they have an opportunity to put their thumb on the scale in Syria, and they're trying to do so. They have an opportunity to do that in a way that could possibly create a very, very safe buffer zone for Israel along their northern border with Syria. So pray that they will have the wisdom to do the right things to make that happen. A chill guy says, so Assad was the lesser of two evils. Well, I think it remains to be seen. We know how bad Assad was. We don't yet know how bad HTS is going to be. But we can infer from what they have done before, and we can infer from the fact that Turkey is trying very hard to extend its dominance over Syria through HTS, that things could be about to get worse in Syria than it was under Bashar al-Assad, for sure. Okay? Now, I don't believe that Christians who live in those areas want to leave. They don't want to abandon their homeland. Christianity, almost since its founding, has been part and parcel of the land of Syria. Those ancient Christians, when I was in northern Israel last week, just a few days ago, I went to the town of Jish, which is a Maronite Christian community, one of my favorite places to go in Israel. And I got video, which I'm going to put up over at Locals here in just a few minutes. I got video of a Maronite Christian lady named Naveen, who, if you were on our tour when I took you to Jish, we met. That she's the one that gave us our briefing. You met Naveen, and she read from a 450-year-old Christian Bible in Aramaic. And they don't read it like we would read, Hezbollah operatives were embedded. We don't read, we just read, we speak it. But when they read the Bible, they believe that you can't just speak the word of God, because it is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword. And it is a living document. And as such, they honor the reading of God's word by singing it. And it is, it'll raise the, hair on the back of your neck. You just get chills up your spine when you hear her actually reading from a 450-year-old Bible in Aramaic, the language Jesus spoke, but she's singing it, and it's just the most beautiful thing. So I'm going to put that up over at chuckholton.com, and along with a lot of other stuff we've been adding over there. So you're going to want to go over there and become a subscriber at chuckholton.com for sure, and hopefully a supporter as well. Now, we've got 1,700 people online. I haven't asked you yet to please hit the like button. I know it's a pain, but I mean, it's fairly easy for you to do, and it makes a big difference. I had a call today with our representative at YouTube, and because of you all, we have gotten to the point that our channel, the guy was telling us, punches so far above its weight on YouTube, meaning the number of subscribers we have compared to the number of viewers we have is all out of whack. We have a lot more viewers because of these lives, because you people do share it. So we have the kind of views that an account with 1 million subscribers normally would get with only 150,000. And that's all thanks to you guys. But what he was telling me when I talked to him is that it does make a difference if you engage, if you leave, comments in the chat box, if you do the super chat, super thanks thing, if you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. What surprises me is that only about 40% of the people who watch me on a regular basis are actually subscribed to the channel. When it's free, you don't get spammed. I'm not going to email you anything or bother you or anything, but you can hit the notification bell if you like and get notified before we go live so you don't miss our lives. But if you like this kind of content, do me a favor, just hit that like button, and that right there tells YouTube more people need to be watching this, and then they go out and show it to more people all around who've never seen us before. Now, the last point I want to make before I go, I think Syria is a warning for America. You have all these different groups in Syria, like I said, Alawites, Druze, Yazidis, Kurds, Sunnis, Shias, you name it. And as I said, because of the brutality that's been visited by one upon the other, they all pretty much hate each other. And they've lost the ability to live together in harmony. And I think that's a warning to America, because I see the same thing happening in the United States. Now, we're at a much earlier stage than Syria, of course. Nobody's out there massacring people in the States yet. But when you look at the division and the rancor and the anger, the free-floating anger that exists in American society, the impoliteness, the impropriety, the debauchery, the tribalism that we see all across America, and it's not by accident. It's intentionally being fomented by organizations who are seeking to pit us one against the other in order to garner votes. And if you want to see what the end of that road looks like, just take a look at Syria right now. Folks, our country is headed the same direction. You might not believe it. You might think, well, that's because you live in a bubble. It's my job as a war correspondent to go all the worst places around the globe where terrible, terrible, terrible things are happening. And I see what failed states look like. I see what loss of civility looks like. I see what it looks like when people's defining values have to do with who they hate instead of who they love. And I see the terrible outcome of that kind of worldview. And then I come back to the United States and I realize most people here are completely clueless to the fact that our country is being pushed down that same road by forces. I could name them. We could do a whole podcast on who's doing it. Suffice it to say that it is happening in America. And if we let it go, if we let it continue, look at places like South Africa, what's happening there. If you're here watching from South Africa, make a comment. Let me know you're watching from South Africa. You obviously know what I mean. Here in Panama, there's a lot of people from South Africa who have fled their own country because of the violence there, because the government has been pushing that tribal division along race lines and class lines and religious lines in South Africa, and you've got people killing each other left and right. But we don't yet have people killing each other left and right, but boy, it's headed that direction. So if you want to know what you can do about that, I'm all about preparing for tough times in the future. I guess what you would call a doomsday prepper in a way. I believe in having some food stored up and some ammo stored up and all that kind of stuff, right? But I have come to understand that the most important prep you can have is relationships. And I wrote a book about it. It came out in November. It's called Death of Civilization. If you haven't heard about it, if this is the first time you're hearing about it, you can get a free download of the book over at chuckholton.com by becoming a supporter over there. Or you can get it on Amazon if you like. And it's called Death of Civilization by Chuck Holton. Maybe Mama Marissa or Rubina can put up a link to it where people can go find it. I would encourage you to get it off, to download it off of chuckholton.com. But either way, I can sum up the book for you in just a couple sentences. The book is about being prepared by intentionally forming tight bonds with the people that live in your area, forming relationships with people, and loving the people around you, being prepared to help the people around you, not to withdraw from the people around you in the case of a grid down event or loss of civility or hurricane, fire, flood, earthquake, whatever. Hi, David. You know what I'm talking about. The valuable thing you can possess when things go sideways are relationships. And it starts with your relationship with your Creator. If you don't have a relationship with your Creator, you should. And if you want to know more about how to have a relationship with your Creator, then send me an email, info@holtonnews.com. And I'll happily talk to you about how to have a more real understanding of who God is and what He wants in your life and how you can trust Him no matter what happens to you. Chuck, many Americans don't understand the pivotal position that U.S. holds vis-a-vis the stability of the world. That's for sure. No question about that. And you hear me talk about that a lot. Any place the Americans withdraw from, we create a vacuum. That vacuum will be filled by somebody, and that somebody probably won't be somebody we agree with. And so it is important for Americans to try to maintain some influence over the world. Don't you social media and the pandemic played a big part in the separation, division, and vile anger? Don't you think social media and the pandemic played a big part in the separation, division, and vile anger? Absolutely, Miriam. Yes, no question, social media has a lot to do with it. But I think social media, you can't just blame social media blankets. I mean, we're on social media right now. And we've formed a community that's helped a ton of people here on the Hot Zone. So we can use this tool for good. It just doesn't often get used for good. Okay? Trina says, please take it easy on the amount of ads that you permit. So do you expect to get paid when you go to work? I just wonder. I do like to get paid when I work. I don't always get paid when I work, but if you think I should work for free, I wonder if you work for free as well. I do quite a bit of volunteering, but this is not one of the volunteering things that I do. So the ads are there, obviously, so that YouTube can stay running as a business and I can stay running as a business. It's not set to a high setting on ads. Surprisingly enough, I know the ads are a pain, and I'm sorry about that. One of the ways that you can avoid them is by being a supporter at chuckholton.com and going and watching the lives there, which are completely ad-free. So that's an idea for you. All right. Okay, folks, that's all I got for today. Thank you for watching. When is the tour to Armenia? It's in June and it is full. So sorry, we don't have any space left on that tour. I am going to be heading for Guam in a few days to go do a little report, do some reporting on the 80th anniversary of the war or the battle for Iwo Jima and Tinian and other places. So I'll be here for another week or so, and then we'll be heading over there with me and Connie. So look forward to that. We're going to have a lot of good stuff for you from that trip. Not just social media, but the church has remained silent and should have been standing. That's exactly what my book says, Miriam. That church is so important. I'm writing another book right now. It's a manual for churches to take charge in this area. Right, and you can pay for YouTube Premium and then not have to watch the ads. For me, it's totally worth it. I mean, if it just saves me 30 minutes a month of watching stupid ads, it's worth it. It's worth every penny. So, all right, folks, that's all I've got for today. Thank you very much for watching the Hot Zone. God bless you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will likely be back tomorrow, so stay tuned.